I'm going to call to order the May 4th, 2021 meeting of the Audit and Finance Committee. Would you please join me in a flag salute in honor of those. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We were in unison. Oh, how unique.
Yeah. Okay, our first order of business is to ask if there are any public comments. Don't see anybody. Have you had any comments, Cynthia?
None were submitted.
All right. Then our first agenda item is the minutes of the February 2nd meeting of the Audit and Finance Committee.
Move for approval.
Thank you.
Second it. Should have, my computer. That's the unit.
But we can always get you a tablet.
Okay, no, I didn't, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so it has been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the February 2nd meeting. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. And so item 2.2 is our discussion of the COVID relief funding. I had to look it up, the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. And I got out my calculator and added up the yet to be spent portion. It is over $10 million to spend in, what, 2 years or less. I was amazed. So, we have the information. She's going to get you the, but President Flamer and Vice President Morrison, would you like to comment, discuss, let us know how this is going to happen?
Vice President Morrison, you want to go ahead and get started, and then I'll add to it.
Okay, sure. And so I'm actually looking at the attachment myself, and it's just a spreadsheet that shows the different fundings that we've received. So we've received funds from the state and from federal sources, and I think a lot of us were familiar with, we've heard the CARES Act and then HERE funding. So the CARES Act is really HERE 1. HERE 2 is actually, it's the CRRSAA, and then you have the HERE 3, the American Rescue Plan. So those are the first ones that you'll see if you're looking at the sheet. We've already spent on HERE 1 all of the student aid portion allocation, and the same is said for HERE 2. So those funds have already been expensed.
We're talking about the student part.
The student portion. For the institutional portion, we're well on our way for spending down the first bucket of HERE. And that one, we do have a spending deadline. It did get extended recently to January 18th of 2022. But you'll see there's a remaining balance of $542,000, which we'll be applying lost revenue reimbursement to, and that will more than cover just that amount in itself. The HERE 2, we have some planned expenditures, including the lost revenue. We also have a number of COVID mitigation factors that I believe President Flamer included in his informational report for the full board. There will be a lot of, we're hoping to plan on investing a lot in technology. A lot of what we need to invest in is COVID related, and there are needs that we would need to meet anyway for the institution. We're also planning on funding custodial and public safety payroll because we will need additional support in the COVID mitigation effort. Additional funds for faculty stipends, possible additional student support. And then with the HERE 2 and the HERE 3, we are also able to apply indirect costs. The HERE 3, we have yet, it's not even, has not even been awarded yet, and I don't know when that's going to happen. We also don't know the process, if we're going to have to apply for it, or if we will get it automatically like we did with the HERE 2, because we were direct aid, the portion that needs to go directly to students, and then also continuing COVID mitigation and the other efforts that we're going to utilize here too for. President Flamer had asked for proposals from to send out to the campus community of ideas of what we could use these funds for. We've had some ideas come in so far, such as replacing windows. In a lot of our newer buildings, we don't have windows that open. So they thought if to get more airflow, we're going to replace those windows with windows that open. That will aid with ventilation. We'll be investing in HVAC. And also, like I said before, a lot of technology infrastructure. Then we have our state sources that have come in. This is the most recent. It's the Emergency the Immediate Budget Act. But that was the recent one that came out from the state, and it included emergency financial assistance to low-income students, and that's going to go as direct aid to eligible students. Also, funds for CalFresh outreach. That will go directly to support buying CalFresh food, and then also staff for additional outreach. Then there's a portion that student retention and enrollment outreach. That will be utilized for outreach and re-engagement efforts. I believe that student liaisons and student ambassadors and liaisons will be utilized to do this work. And then we also have the COVID-19 block grant. That was one that we actually received a while ago, but we had a little bit longer to spend it. So far, we spent a bulk of it on testing and COVID mitigation, and we're also able to spend it on the cost of transition. So we'll be taking advantage of that. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any additional information.
Richard? Trustee Dorn?
You go first.
I was wondering, could you talk a little bit more about how we're going to use some of these funds to offset losses, but also let's talk a little bit more about debt relief in terms of student debt.
So we are, what we're looking at in terms of lost revenue is we can look at the auxiliary. So we're going to be offsetting lost revenue for dining, for the residence halls, for parking, non-resident tuition, and community education. So far, those are the areas that we're focusing on, and our auditors have given us formal approval to move forward, and they've also approved our methods of calculating the lost revenue amount. We're going back to March 13th of 2020, and then we're going to kind of do it in chunks. So as we've actually can say, okay, we realize this lost revenue, and we have good estimates, then we'll be actually applying that to the book. As far as student debt, we are going to, in the future student aid allocations, we're going to be asking students to opt in so that we can use those funds to offset any balances that they might have. Currently, we can't just use it and apply it to debt first and say if there's anything left over, here you go, you get to use it. We have to get them to opt in and allow us to do that.
Perfect.
Okay, going to call. Trustee
Well,
Dorn?
so that won't be used for the $2 million accounts receivable, or?
Currently, we can't just use it to wipe out debt.
That was my one question. So then, what are faculty stipends out of this?
So there was an MOU that was executed, and so faculty, for converting courses for distance education, there was kind of a formula depending on how many they did, they were eligible to receive a stipend.
And then the CalFresh to Del Norte, will any go to Klamath? That's going to be a question for you.
I'm sure that if there's a need, that it will.
Because when we were out there, what was that, a couple of years ago, they were pretty big on the need.
Well, we have the money for them if they let us know that they need it.
Oh, okay, that was my thing. And then the overall thing I had a question about was, when you do mitigation, is there any plan to push for vaccination or educating? I know Marty did a great radio spot, but is there anything on campus to push for students to be vaccinated with money, a campaign?
We are sending messages to students.
Okay.
We are encouraging them. Right now, we are not saying they have to do it, but we have to be careful on how we message it.
Okay.
Because if we say that we strongly encourage you to do it, and they happen to die or get very sick, then we're liable. So there's a fine line how we're going to encourage them to do that.
Then how do they trust you being mandatory?
Well, they're not.
Oh.
Really,
Well, you have two
because,
reasons. Okay.
right, because yes, they're saying it will be mandatory as long as there's an FDA-approved vaccine, which there isn't yet. So there's a little bit of a room to wiggle.
But it just seems like it would be a good use of the money to promote vaccinations, especially when you look at that survey of faculty and staff. It's really concerned about the students.
I'm really unsure whether, what that messaging should be,
Okay.
but we're sending messages to students as well as my article. But on the other side is that we're arranging for our health center to offer vaccinations starting in August.
That was my next question. Is
We
there
are.
going to be on-site
We are
vaccination?
going to do that. We have to just figure out what the process, like appointments, so we don't have any wasted vaccines. So
Okay.
our IPA is gonna handle that for us.
And if you did I'm not an expert, but Johnson & Johnson doesn't have the expiration date, does it?
I don't know enough about it. I
Okay.
just know that we're gonna have it on campus.
I didn't want it, but I know
Yeah.
it's.
Just as long as we offer it, both testing as well as vaccinations, we're gonna offer on campus.
Trustee Capini?
Do I have to be on speaker?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
My concern is obviously with the, 2 million liability and uncollected, debt. And I, like you say, you can't directly just wipe it out. That would be great. How is that gonna look like? What is the approach? Because you've, said that you didn't wanna, do a final thing until the fall. So how does that look like, using those funds? What's the strategy?
Would you like me to take that, Vice President Harrison? Is right now, our thought is to go through our financial aid office and just simply say, this money is available to you, and if you would like to opt in terms of, can we use that money to wipe off your debt? And that will allow you to come back to school in fall semester debt-free. So encourage them to enroll, knowing that the debt is wiped off and it's not quite frankly out of their pocket, it's the money from the government.
So you would contact each, okay.
Yes.
And most of that, or a big portion of it, was historically from the resident halls?
That is the biggest number of debt, the amount of debt is from the residence hall.
Okay.
But over the last few years, however, they've done a magnificent job of reducing that liability.
Right, it's a 95% success.
It has been,
Last few years.
yes.
And what about Biden's proposal to eliminate student debt? Would that help with the 2 million?
That-
Accounts
that-
receivable, or do we know?
That proposal is looking forward, not looking backwards. Free college tuition, so similar to our college promise, moving forward versus wiping off past debt.
Because I thought, yeah.
But, of course, it's really early in that whole negotiation. I don't know what it's gonna finally look like.
Well, you can't count on the budget.
Yes.
And then did the budget committee look at this, or is this just you and
Look at what, I'm sorry.
how this money was spent? Is that part of the budget committee?
I wanted to refer that to Vice President Morrison.
We didn't look specifically.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute to see. I don't know how people are gonna hear me in the full board meeting on Zoom.
I'm gonna,
Okay, all right.
This one.
So the Budget Advisory Committee didn't look specifically and say, okay, how we should spend it, but they did put forth 2 recommendations in regards to COVID spending to help direct what we focused on.
Thank you.
So I had a question, to clarify what you were just saying about opt-in. I was gonna ask, now I understand better what you're talking about, but that would refer to being able to apply these funds to the outstanding student debt issue
Yes.
if they return to school.
No, actually, it's not an if. We're just trying to tie both messages together.
Okay,
To say,
but-
yes, your debt's taken care of, which will allow you to come back because you have no debt in the system.
Okay, but they can opt in whether they're coming back to school or not.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I was going to, the lost revenue, is clear to me now. And then indirect costs, can you give some examples of indirect costs that this money is covering?
I would love to be able to. There's a lot that's up in the air about the indirect costs, and we've reached out to our auditors. It really comes down to whether we use our negotiated rate, which we do have at 25%, but it says almost specifically that it's for salaries and benefits, which we're not charging a whole lot of that to these funds. But there's also the 10% de minimis, which I'm waiting to hear, okay, can we opt out of the 25%? Can we use the 10% across the board instead? So there's still a lot up in the air about the indirect.
So there's just rules about how you can identify those costs, or it's just a general category and it's how much you can apply to that category?
We're first of all trying to identify which are the direct costs that we can charge which are indirect to. So that's the first step. And then the second step is, okay, well, what rate are we?
Rate in terms of percentage of the budget?
So it would either be our negotiated indirect rate, which is 25%, or in the legislation that the minimum is 10% indirect rate.
Okay.
And then I wanted to clarify something on the opt-in. We also can only go as far back as far as utilizing our HERE funds. We can only go back to when COVID started.
Oh, got it. Okay, so just a little over a year, is it? Okay. And it's a significant, I know we've already spent some, and then in HER 3, which you said we actually haven't gotten those funds yet.
Correct.
That's a lot of money in student aid. I don't understand, okay, so that actually is over $9 million on the books, so to speak, right? It's student aid allocation and institutional allocation. Is that correct on this sheet? Or is this all the same money?
So there's the two, so the student aid portion allocation, that column is completely separate. That's a separate bucket of money, and then the institutional portion is its own separate bucket of money.
Right,
Two
so-
separate pots.
So this HERF 3 is actually almost $10 million itself.
For,
Okay.
A third of our budget.
How is the
I know.
student aid portion allocated? Is it just in addition to every student getting financial aid, or is it beyond financial aid current students, or how, do we know how that gets allocated?
As far as I know, President Flavor and I talked with Ryan Connor, and her plan was to utilize the funds, or award funds similarly to how it's been done. So they take the total number of eligible students and divide it evenly amongst them, but I don't think her plan is to do the entire portion in one semester.
Right,
She's going to benefit students over multiple semesters.
right. Well, that would make sense.
Does that get allocated right to the students, or say they have a cafeteria bill, et cetera, et cetera?
It goes straight to the student,
Right.
and that's why having the student opt in is going to be important.
And in the emergency financial assistance to low-income students, is that definition low income any different than financial aid recipients?
I don't know.
I don't think so. I think with any eligible student, I think they were considered low income.
Right, okay. Are there any other questions about this?
Well, on this grant, is there any targets that we have to meet as far as eligibility on the grant? I mean, we'll have to document everything.
We just have to make sure that we spend money according to the federal guidelines. And Julia, Vice President Morrison, is documenting every penny that goes out into whom.
Sure.
Trustee Doyle?
So I'm back to Carol's point of the 10 million. So when you close the books in July, if you have this money and it's not spent, will that show as part of our reserve? Or where's this money in our spreadsheets? Is that going to be part of your standard monthly financial report, or is it going to be a separate report like we used to get what was it, the title 10 or something?
Fund 15?
Yeah.
Oh,
Slush fund.
Yeah,
Fund
that's
15.
fine.
Yeah. So how will we see or watch how this money's spent?
I'll have to do separate reports then, because these funds will not see this reflected in the unrestricted general fund.
Right.
And then also with the here's 1, 2, and 3, it's part of the G5 drawdown system, which what we do is we only draw down the funds and physically receive them after we spend them. So I do it on a monthly basis, we do a drawdown, because we're actually not allowed to draw down in advance, too far in advance.
Well, I don't know I'd like to see a separate report, but I don't know if that's cost effective for your time.
If I may offer, Vice President Morrison, yes, starting fall semester, we should have reports going out about how we're spending money, just not for the board, but for the academic senate and for the whole community to know where the money is and how we're spending it, so people are made aware of it. But also, I imagine that Vice President Morrison will be talking to the Budget Advisory Committee as well.
And this is sort of a silly question, but since you're constantly with the auditors, they're sort of the God blessing you. Is that in our contract, or do we have to pay extra for that?
I don't believe we pay extra.
Okay.
They want to make sure that we're in compliance, it's going to help them and
Because we pay a lump sum to them, right?
we do.
Okay, so that's why I was just sort of,
Yeah, it's a good question.
doesn't matter.
And one thing I did want to mention is I don't know the details yet with these additional funds, but with the HERF one, we had to do quarterly reporting. I could share those quarterly reports with the board.
Let's talk about that.
Well, I was just gonna say, maybe you wanted to share it with the audit committee, might be another idea.
So,
Which is what I was going to suggest, that's why I said, let's talk about it, yeah.
so what is you said it, but, what's the timeline we have to spend the HERF funds?
Actually, it is, on the spreadsheet, so HERF 1 timeline is January 18th, 2022. It's in that second to the right column.
Oh, okay, okay.
So how are you gonna spend the CalFresh money that quickly by the end of October, when you were at Del Norte, you only would have 2 months to...
Well, actually, it's not that much money to spend, it's only $30,000.
Okay.
So, we can easily spend the money on food for all 3 campuses.
Okay.
What we didn't want to do is spend it up front and then fall semester have zeroed out, because we'll still have to buy a lot of food for students when they're physically back on campuses.
Okay, are there any other questions? If not, we will go on to item 2.3 on our agenda, which is the 2021-2022 preliminary budget and budget forecast. And there's information in the agenda, and then there is the 25-page budget proposal. Again, I think we could start with President Flamer, Vice President Morrison on any remarks you have at the outset.
Certainly, this is the prelim budget, of course, is based on current assumptions, on what we have signals coming out of the Chancellor's office and the Governor's office, et cetera, and based on the Governor's January proposed budget. We expect the Governor's May revise to come out in 2 weeks, May 14th, and we will see what happens with that budget, but you will see those numbers reflected in the tentative budget, I believe, in June. But, so this prelim budget is really based on our best estimate and guess of what's being signaled at Sacramento, but also what our budget assumptions should be coming both from the board as well as from the Budget Advisory Committee. And with that, I'll turn it over to Vice President Morrison to walk us through the assumptions and what we're currently seeing.
So, Cindy, if you can start with the attachment, please.
Tracy, do you want to come up here so you can see better?
So, I think the problem is.
Yes, okay.
Okay, so can you jump to page, PDF page 8, please? So as President Slamer mentioned, we're fairly early on in the budget development process. This is just the preliminary budget, and then, as I mentioned, the tentative budget will come to the board in June, and the final budget to the board in September. That's perfect, thank you. And so for the preliminary budget, we're just kind of looking at two scenarios. We're looking at a hold harmless scenario, and then the student-centered funding formula scenario. The hold harmless, if you recall, is basically our 17-18 total revenue, with the compounded COLA each year. And so we use that for one scenario, and that total is $28.9 million. Then with our estimated student-centered funding formula revenue, it's a very simple estimate. It was just taking our current years and then adding an assumed 1.5% COLA. And I will mention that the 1.5% COLA is at least in the January governor budget, or the governor's January budget proposal. It was contingent upon districts adopting actual plans to reduce that. So for the SCIF revenue, SCFM, SCIF, it's just easier to say, $3.7 million is that revenue figure. And Cindy, if you can scroll down so we can see the expense assumptions. The salaries in 21-22, we've assumed a step increases for permanent employees as well as that 1.5% COLA being passed through. Associate faculty is based off of the 2021 actual to date, and it includes increases for step and parity pay. Benefits, we've included an estimated STRS amount as well as an estimated PERS amount, and the health and welfare benefits include a slight increase. When this was printed, I didn't know those amounts yet, but I did just get those rates from Christy Sayer. Our medical is going up 1%. That's extremely great. It's not great if it's going up at all, but 1% is absolutely good. And dental went up slightly, vision isn't changing. Fixed expenses, we're including increases in some expenses such as insurance. Insurance goes up, has been going up every year, with some offsetting decreases in certain utilities. Other operating includes a partial reinstatement of PE athletics discretionary budget. If you recall, the PE athletics discretionary budget was almost completely cut for the current fiscal year. So a portion of it is being reinstated. And then in the SCIF scenario, an additional $500,000 is included to address diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And this was a recommendation as a budget assumption priority by the board of trustees. The capital outlay, if the allocation is the same as 2021. Net transfers out in both scenarios include our annual $90,000 to the Child Development Center, the amount to the Shively Farm to support 50% of the farm manager, and then an amount we're in a $1,020,000 figure to help continue funding the OPEB or other post-employment benefits. In the SCIF scenario, there's an additional transfer out added, and that's $1 million to capital outlay for technology and facility replacement and for repairs and maintenance. And this was a recommendation from the Budget Advisory Committee for the budget assumption priorities. Any questions on the assumptions?
I think that we may get a question at the full board about if the board does ratify the CERP. So the CERP salary savings are not included in the prelim budget.
Correct.
They aren't.
They are not.
That was a huge list.
It's when we talked as a board about budget assumptions, which was wonderful, but this was what I was thinking of in terms of budget assumptions. So I know that this isn't the first time we've done this, but I think it's such a necessary process, obviously. I was glad to see them again.
And I thought that medical insurance, 1%, that was better than I thought. But in 2 years, it's gonna skyrocket when everybody catches up with their surgeries.
Right, yes, correct. That's what I've heard. A lot of people form any type of voluntary
I-
work.
Hmm.
So, next page, please continue, you guys here, there, page CS page 9. This is a summary of the full farm list for 2021-22. You can see what's included here. We have the actual 2019-20 numbers, where we ended with a 3.1 million ending fund balance, or 10.5%, and those are our audited figures. Our final budget for 2020-2021 includes, or has an estimated ending fund balance of 10.5%. So carrying forward that 3.2 million beginning fund balance for 2021-22, and including the whole farmland revenue of 20.9 million. We have, you'll see the other state is down a little bit from this current year's budget, because we are anticipating a decrease in state lottery proceeds. And then other local, we see an increase, because we're hoping to see an increase in non-resident tuition as more students return to us in person. So that is a total revenue of 3.6 million, down to use of funds or our expenses. The salaries and benefits, we have already touched on, they include step increases and a 1.5% COLA pass-through. The fixed expenses, we already kind of talked about, and this is the other operating, it just includes, you'll see it did go down even though we're adding budget for PE and athletics, but the decrease is because in this current year, in 2020-2021, the other operating included the IBNR, or incurred but not reported expense, that we had to pay to our prior medical JPA for activating the JPA. That was a one-time expense. We won't be seeing that again. So total uses, 29.4 million, which is less than our total expected revenue in this scenario. So we are seeing an uptick in the end fund balance, up to 10.9%, and that does factor in the transfers out. That includes the Child Development Center, the farm, and the additional funds to OPEB. Any questions on the whole term summary?
Actually, so when is the faculty contract up for negotiation? Is it next year?
We are about to start the negotiation for compensation in a few weeks from now, and we open up the whole contract next year.
With the compensation, so that would be in this budget.
Once we settle it, if we do, yes,
And we're doing interest-based?
absolutely.
Okay.
For faculty, we are.
Thank you. Cynthia, next, can you jump to page 17 of the PDF? So here we have the, this is the whole farmland scenario again, but it includes the budget forecast for 2022-23 and 2023-24. So with the whole farmland, it's just adding COLA each year. For 2022-23, we're estimating a 1.5% COLA, and 2023-24 is a 2% COLA. And through both scenarios, slight increases in our other state and other local revenues, salaries for both 2022-23 and 2023-24 are step-only increases. There's no COLA pass-through in those scenarios. Other operating, slight increase, fixed expenses, slight increases, and a slight decrease in the transfers out. We have the same, the 90,000 to Child Development Center, the 50% of the farm manager, and then I think it's 800,000 each of those out years to OPEB. And you'll see the fund balance going down in each of those, budget forecast years, down to 9.8% in 2022-23, and 9.3% in 2023-24. Any questions about this full termless multi-year forecast? Okay, Cynthia, will you jump to the next page, CFC 18? So here we're jumping, it's a summary showing the SCIF, or the Student Center Funding Formula revenue. And this is, again, just looking at 2021-22. So you'll see the main differences here is the SCIF revenue is higher than the whole harmless, so we're looking at 30.7 million. Total revenue in this scenario is 32.4 million. Most of our usage assumptions are the same, except for other operating. We've included that 500,000 for DEI initiatives. And then transfer out increase of 1 million with that transfer out to capital outlay. In this scenario, an estimated ending fund balance of 11.5%. And finally, we can jump to page 22. So here we have the multi-year forecast through 2023-24 showing the SCIF revenue assumptions. Again, these are very simple SCIF revenue estimates, just adding COLA. Again, the 1.5% COLA in 2022-23 and 2% in 2023-24. When we get closer to the tentative budget, we'll be using an actual formula and some estimated metrics for the SGS, stands for the Student Success Metrics, to get a better estimate of our student-centered funding formula. So again, the salary and benefit assumptions are the same. That's only increase, no pass-through of the COLA. That $500,000 bump in 2021-22 for DEI initiatives is also included in 2022-23 and 2023-24. And it can be for DEI or any other high priority initiatives that the district might want to address. We also have in the assumption for the transfers out, you'll see that that is increased. And Cynthia, can you scroll down so we can see the bottom of the page? And so in each of the out years, there's an additional 500,000 that has been added that can be transferred out to OPEB, pension, or capital outlay, depending on what seems to be a priority. And so you'll see the ending fund balances in these two scenarios, it increased up to 13.4% in 2022-23 and up to 15.8% in 2023-24.
But what did you use for the medical insurance in 22, 23, 24?
Thank you, I'll back up to that. So we do have assumptions in there, some estimates for PERS and STIRS, and I believe in each of the out years for medical, there's a 3% increase. Which
probably low.
it might be low, but that is 3%.
Well,
So, I have one question. With the SERP, if it goes through, then in these budget forecasts, understanding that there may still be some positions hired, so we're not talking about an actual dollar amount that we know would be there, but they would show up, those savings would show up in the salaries and benefits part?
Correct. So we will update the position inventory with all of the retirements and the replacements. And so those savings will be reflected in those figures. And the benefits are tied to the position inventory as well.
Right.
And then is there any word out on the STIRS PERS, the state adding money? I mean, last time we chatted, we probably might be doing something.
I personally haven't heard anything for this upcoming budget cycle, and nor have I heard too much advocacy for it.
I think most of the strength behind the arguments are going to be to pay down the debt, so we don't have to do trans. So just wipe off all the deferred payments.
So I have another question, Art. In the past couple of years, when we have been talking about budget and budget forecasts, we have been talking at times about the fiscal cliff and the upcoming, what we saw as such a fault line that was going to, you know, really give us a headache and, you know, minus zero fund balance, et cetera. And either of these, even the hold harmless, doesn't look like a disaster. This is out to 23, 24. So what do we see happening with that idea of a real fiscal crisis?
It's still going to happen, I believe, especially in California. We just don't see where the assumptions are past 23, 24. And that's why there's a lot of conversation in Sacramento now to beef up or to add more to the state's fund reserve in anticipation in a couple of years, California is going to be hurting economically. So the state's pushing to get more in their fund reserve, as we should be.
Okay. And obviously, this is a huge question, but what's the one or two underlying assumptions about why 2 to 3 years down the road it's going to be so bad?
I don't know. Mostly based on history with California,
Uh-huh.
but also we see an exodus of people leaving, the richest people leaving California, relocating, so the tax base will likely decrease.
Was it the first time in, how many years our census went down?
Yes.
This is what we need Bruce. He was the great fiscal cliff person. But, I mean, Carol, I think you're right, but you look at how much money we're giving away
Yeah.
federally and statewide, and, you know, look at this how many millions for COVID, and there's no income
Yeah.
in the state to pay all this money back. Is just why I think somebody's gonna have to pay this back at some point.
Well, you've seen what the Treasury Secretary had said this morning about interest rates are gonna have to go up at some point, even though the Fed is, you know, that alone is sensitive.
You're right, and so we could just make all these assumptions of where the fiscal cliff is happening. It's going to happen because we're going to have to pay the piper, if you will, for all the money we're borrowing from ourselves in 2 or 3 years. And I think that's where a problem's going to be.
And you could look at this medical insurance, I remember one projection you had way back when you were thinking, what was it, 8 or 4, something, was it 14% or 8 or 9%?
I remember it.
Yeah, something, and so you're gonna have potentially have that again,
Yes.
you know.
And that is why heavily on Julia, Vice President Morrison's mind and myself is getting the college ready for that downturn that's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
Well, I'm glad I asked that question.
Well, but I think.
No, we do need to know.
We, you know, we may not be here anymore.
Well, the other part that we did not mention, so Vice President Moore, I forgot to mention earlier, is that the other part of the governor's May revise is some one-time money coming our way. We just don't know how much that one-time money is going to be and how long we have to spend it. So that's the other piece that Vice President Morrison and I have to give some thought about.
So there's nothing in here, that's not in here at the moment.
It is not in there, it's not, yes.
And I just confirmed when I asked last time about the recall, this budget will be approved before the recall election happens.
Yes,
Yeah,
it will.
so even with the new governor, this year would be fine, but next year could be changed.
Which was the other assumption in my mind, because if the governor leaves office, someone else who's more fiscally conservative is going to cut back on spending.
Potentially,
Yes,
yeah.
potentially cutting back.
Well, that happened last week, unfortunately, last recall.
Yes.
Okay. Does anyone have any, can't forecast that.
We cannot forecast the recall.
That's just speechless.
Okay, are there any other questions from the committee regarding all of the work that has gone into this? I know it has to be done, it's the job, but it is a huge amount of work. And doing a good job with budget assumptions is critical to having this, right, so.
I did have one, what page I highlighted, a question, probably for you, Dr. Klingler. I don't know which page it is. It's regarding the total administrators.
Total
Maybe
administrators.
you know this. And so, what scenario of administrators does this represent? As you know, my email for clarification.
Yes, teacher.
Meaning VP of HR, what, are deans administrators?
Yes.
I'm sorry, okay, so,
I'm trying to get to the same
Oh,
page
sorry.
you're referring to, and I'm not getting there.
There you go.
So trustee Dorner, are you asking us how many administrators this represents?
essentially.
That what you're-
I'm just wondering, because Dr. Hill had two positions, now it's, her one was two, and now it's going back to two.
Right, and so this does reflect the current position inventory, which has in it her, the interim VPI, which is Carrie Mayer,
Right.
who will be replaced by Mike Haley and the Dean of Career Education. But also, we have the Vice President for Student Services as a vacant position in the position inventory.
And then we have Julia's position.
Oh, my gosh, yes,
No,
absolutely.
that's
Yeah.
what
Oh,
that's my real question, and then the VP of HR.
right, it has
So we have,
all the VPs and.
but Marty's
executive-
not a VP,
Yeah.
is he?
No, he's not, but he's the executive director.
So
So
he's
he's also in this,
in this, but only half his salary still, or all of it? Because I thought the
Vice
foundation.
President Morrison, I think it's half his salary, one's auxiliary and the other half is general fund.
Correct.
Okay, and then how many deans are there?
We have four
Okay.
deans, 3 academic deans and 1 student services dean, Ryan Connor,
And,
which is a pretty light organization.
well, no, I was just trying to get a feel for what it all was.
Okay.
And then who are the classified administrators? You just mentioned.
The classified administrators are all directors and managers.
Okay,
For example, Jordan Hamel, he's a classified manager. Tiffany Schmidtke, director of admissions.
okay. Because I don't ever know, I ever thought about this classified, I thought,
Well,
was your,
it's really not classified servers per se.
okay,
It's just a classification that the state put with classified managers.
but they're not in your cabinet, are they?
No, they are not, nor are they in the classified union. They're in a quasi-union all to themselves, that have no bargaining power.
So thank you for completely confusing.
Yeah, Matt adds it us too, but yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, are there any other questions? Hearing none, we will adjourn the current meeting of the Budget of the Audit and Finance Committee. Thank you.